Welcome back to the Echoes of Ihsan podcast. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're going to
Oh,
be diving deep into Sahih Bukhari,
okay.
specifically Book 80, The Laws of Inheritance.
Fascinating.
And this is a topic that, many of our listeners have been asking about.
Yeah.
So we're really excited to dig in here. And, I have to say, I wasn't sure what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
But going through all of these hadiths, it is
Yeah.
really, really fascinating stuff.
I agree. It's a topic that's often, misunderstood.
Yeah,
And it's one that has a lot of, intricate details and really impacts the lives of Muslims in a
absolutely.
very practical way.
And we're talking about inheritance in the time of the Prophet Muhammad.
Yes.
And we're relying primarily on this collection of hadiths, which again, for our listeners who might not be familiar,
Mm.
a hadith is essentially a narration about the Prophet's words or actions.
Hmm.
So it gives us like a window into,
Exactly.
how things were understood and practiced during that time
Right. It's like a snapshot.
of their life
Exactly.
and their understanding of these teachings.
So where should we start with this? I mean, there's so much to unpack.
Well, we could start with the very first hadith in Book 80,
Okay.
which actually talks about Jabir bin Abdullah,
Okay.
a companion of the Prophet, who fell very ill. And naturally, when people fall ill,
Yeah.
they start thinking about, what's going to happen to my
Right.
worldly possessions? What's going to happen after I'm gone?
Absolutely.
And he asked the Prophet for guidance on how to distribute his property.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it gets interesting.
Okay.
The Prophet, at that time, did not answer him
Really? Why?
because the verses regarding inheritance
Mm.
were revealed right after.
So he didn't know yet.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
It's like, a divine timing kind of thing.
Oh, wow. So it was Jabir's
Yep.
inquiry that prompted
It seems like that.
revelation.
Right, like almost like this very practical,
Yeah.
pressing need. So it wasn't just, a theoretical discussion about laws. This was like a real-life situation.
Exactly. A man on his deathbed
Right.
asking, what do I do?
Wow, and Allah reveals
Yeah.
the verses on inheritance.
Right.
That's powerful. Now,
So that kind of highlights that very responsive nature
Yeah.
of Islamic teachings.
absolutely. Okay, well, I'm curious about this. So we have these laws of inheritance, but what about the Prophet himself?
Ah, that's a very good question. And it's one that often people find surprising.
Okay.
Several hadiths in this book, including 7:18 and 7:19, mention that the Prophet's own possessions could not be inherited.
Wait, what? So his family couldn't inherit from him?
Exactly.
That doesn't seem right.
Yeah, a bit surprising at first.
Yeah.
But
I mean, usually inheritance is all about passing down wealth
mhm.
to your children.
Right.
Rick, what's going on here?
So the hadiths explain that anything he left behind, whether it was his money, land, or even his belongings, were to be used for the benefit of the entire Muslim community.
For charity, essentially.
Exactly, for charitable purposes.
So not even his closest relatives. I mean, we're talking like Fatima, his daughter, or Al-Abbas, his uncle.
Correct.
They couldn't inherit anything.
That's right. In fact, there's a very interesting story about this. Hadith 7:18 talks about how Fatima and Al-Abbas actually approached Abu Bakr,
Okay.
the first caliph after the Prophet's death, and they were requesting their perceived portion of inheritance. Specifically, they mention land at Fadak and Khaybar,
Okay.
which were, quite valuable assets,
Yeah.
potentially,
Right.
bringing a lot of wealth and influence.
So they felt they were entitled to a share.
Yeah. And Abu Bakr, based on his understanding of the Prophet's teachings, refused.
He said no.
He said no. He said that the Prophet's possessions
Okay.
could not be treated as just personal wealth to be divided up
Okay.
among heirs.
So what was their reaction?
Well, the hadith mentions that Fatima, she disagreed with his decision.
Okay.
And it even says that she didn't speak to him for the rest of her life.
Oh, wow.
So you can see how even within the Prophet's family, there were, different interpretations.
Yeah, for sure.
Different understandings, strong feelings.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that raises a really interesting question for me. Like, what does this tell us about the concept of leadership and material possessions in early Islam?
It's a great question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It suggests that leadership in early Islam wasn't really about amassing personal wealth or, building a dynasty through inheritance.
Right.
The Prophet seemed to emphasize a spiritual legacy over a material one.
Yeah, putting the community first.
Right. Serving the community, ensuring the welfare of all,
Yeah.
even if it meant foregoing personal claims to inheritance.
Okay, so that's the Prophet. But what about everyone else? Like, what were the general principles of inheritance that apply to the rest of the community?
Right. So for that, we can look at hadiths like 724 and 727.
Okay.
These hadiths talk about faraid,
Okay, farid.
which refers to fixed shares of inheritance
Okay.
that are outlined in the Quran.
So it's not just, free for all, grab what you can.
No,
Okay.
there's a very
It's
specific...
laid out.
Yes, it's a divine blueprint
Right.
for how this wealth is supposed to be distributed.
So there's a clear hierarchy in
Yeah.
terms of who gets what,
Exactly.
and it's all based on the Quran.
Right.
Okay, now what happens if there's wealth left over after those fixed shares are distributed?
That's where Saba comes in.
Okay.
The remaining wealth after those shares are fulfilled should be given to the closest male relative.
Okay, so that's like a backup plan.
Exactly.
Okay, so the Asaba basically inherits
Yeah.
whatever's left over.
That's right.
So it's like a safety net
Mm-hmm.
woven into the fabric of the system.
It is. It's a system that aims to ensure
Yeah,
fairness and structure in distribution.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But I imagine that even with these clear guidelines,
Mm-hmm.
there must have been situations where applying these principles, maybe got a little complicated or there are unique circumstances.
Absolutely. Real life is rarely as straightforward as a
Yeah.
rule book.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. So let's dive into some of those specific cases.
Okay, sounds good.
Let's see what happens when things get a little bit more interesting.
All right. You know what's interesting is that as we go through these hadiths,
Yeah.
it's clear that these laws of inheritance weren't just about the dry, division of wealth.
Right.
There was this underlying current of
Yeah.
compassion, social responsibility.
Absolutely. Like it was designed to create like a
Mhm.
framework for a just and caring
Yes,
society.
today.
And it's amazing how those principles, even though they were revealed in a specific time and context,
Mm-hmm.
they still resonate with us today.
Yeah.
Like the ideas of fairness, taking care of the vulnerable, the balance between individual rights and the community.
Mm-hmm.
Like those are timeless.
Absolutely. And it makes you think, how much we can learn from these ancient principles
Right.
to address the challenges that we face
For sure.
in our modern world.
Absolutely. But for now, let's stay focused on this
Okay.
specific collection of hadiths. Now, remember we talked about the Asaba,
Yes.
that closest male relative
Yes.
who inherits the remaining wealth
Right.
after those fixed shares are distributed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to see, how is this Asaba actually determined?
Okay.
Are there any specific...
Yeah. So Hadith 730
Okay.
offers an interesting perspective on this.
Okay.
It mentions that Abu Bakr
Okay.
considered a grandfather
Okay.
to be like a father
Okay.
when it came to matters of inheritance.
So if there's no father, the grandfather would
Oh.
step in.
Exactly. It's like, this concept of lineage and proximity
Mhm.
in determining the Asaba.
Makes sense.
Like a chain of responsibility.
Yeah.
Like a built-in
Mm-hmm.
support system.
It is.
Okay, now this concept of lineage
Mm-hmm.
is actually elaborated upon in Hadith 731,
Okay.
which gives us this fascinating
Yes.
kind of historical perspective
Yeah.
on the evolution of inheritance laws
Right.
in early Islam.
So it mentions how in the very early days, inheritance was primarily given to offspring.
Okay, so like your children.
Exactly. To your children.
Okay.
Legacies were given to parents.
Okay.
But then this system was modified through divine revelation.
Really? So they changed it up.
Yeah. So Allah,
Mm-hmm.
through revelation, introduced a new system
Okay.
where males received a share
Okay.
equivalent to 2 females.
Oh, okay. So this is the principle of males inheriting twice the share of
yeah.
females.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's important to remember this was revealed
Mm-hmm.
to address specific social and economic realities of that time.
So we can't judge it based on
Our modern standard.
So exactly.
Yeah.
Context is key.
Right.
And this hadith also mentions
Right.
other changes that were introduced
Okay.
to ensure fairness.
Right.
For example, it specifies that parents,
Mhm.
each parent should receive 1/6 of the inheritance,
Okay.
and a wife receives 1/8 if the deceased has children,
Mm-hmm.
but a fourth if he has no children.
So it's like they were trying to account for all these different scenarios and
Yeah.
make sure everyone
This show.
was taken care of.
Right, where each piece
Yeah.
has to fit just right to
Okay.
create this balanced system.
Now, what about debts? Like if someone dies and they have debts,
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And actually, Islamic inheritance law doesn't just focus on distributing assets.
Okay.
It also addresses
Like,
the financial obligations
makes
of
sense.
the deceased.
Okay.
And in fact, settling debts
Mm-hmm.
is considered a primary obligation.
Even before
Yeah.
inheritance.
It takes precedence
Okay.
over the distribution of inheritance.
So first you pay off the debts, then you distribute whatever is left.
Exactly. Several hadiths
Okay.
in this book emphasize this.
Okay.
Hadith 723
Mm-hmm.
states that if someone dies in debt
Okay.
and they don't have enough to
Yeah.
cover those debts,
Mm-hmm.
the responsibility falls upon the Muslim community
Wow.
to settle those debts.
So even in death,
Yes,
the community is responsible
it is.
for taking care of its members.
That's right. It highlights that interconnectedness.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
That beautiful.
Okay, so that's debts, but what about dependents? Like if someone dies
Mm-hmm.
and they have children who are too young to take care of themselves.
Right.
Or elderly parents
Yeah.
who relied on them for support.
That's another crucial
Yeah.
aspect of Islamic inheritance law.
Okay.
It's designed to make sure
Yeah.
that dependents are cared for,
Okay.
even after the death of their provider.
So it's not just about dividing things up.
No, it's about ensuring their well-being and their livelihood.
Okay.
Hadith 737
Mm.
states that if someone dies leaving behind dependents,
Mm-hmm.
like young children, those in need,
Okay.
the prophet considered himself
Right.
their guardian.
So he's setting an example.
Yes.
Like, this is
Yeah.
my responsibility.
Yes.
Wow.
It's not just a legal obligation.
Right.
It's a
More than that.
and spiritual imperative.
That's powerful. So we're seeing how these laws
Mhm.
create this framework
Yeah.
for a society that prioritizes
Mhm.
justice, compassion, and social responsibility.
It is truly inspiring, isn't it?
It is. Okay, now let's talk about some of the more complicated or sensitive
Mhm.
issues
Mhm.
surrounding inheritance.
Okay.
We've touched upon cases where paternity
Right.
was contested,
Mm-hmm.
which I imagine is something that could lead to a
Absolutely.
lot of disputes
Just a very
and problems.
sensitive
Right.
issue.
So what other insights do these hadiths provide on this specific issue?
Hadith 742 offers a very clear statement from the prophet
Right.
where he says, the boy is for the owner of the bed.
Oh,
Now, that might sound simple,
Yeah.
but it carries a profound message
okay.
about social recognition of paternity within marriage.
Okay, so it's acknowledging the husband's role
Yes.
as the father.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And you know that this was a time when there
Ex-
wasn't,
Yeah,
you know,
right.
DNA testing or things like that.
exactly.
So this principle really served to maintain social stability
Right.
and prevent a lot of unnecessary disputes.
Okay.
It protected the integrity of families,
Hmm.
and it provided a clear framework
Right.
for determining lineage and inheritance rights.
It's about keeping things stable and orderly.
Exactly. And this theme of social stability and cohesion is further emphasized
Okay.
in Hadith 756. This hadith addresses the issue of inheritance
Mm-hmm.
between Muslims and non-Muslims.
Oh, okay.
It's a sensitive topic.
Yeah, it's a sensitive topic.
But it's one that these
Mhm.
hadiths
Yeah.
don't shy away from.
Okay, so what does it say about that? Like, could Muslims inherit from non-Muslims?
So the Prophet's statement in this hadith is very clear.
Okay.
He says that a Muslim cannot be the heir of a disbeliever, nor can a disbeliever be the heir of a Muslim.
Okay, so there's a clear boundary there.
Yes.
Okay, now why is that?
So the primary reason
Mhm.
for this separation
Yeah.
was to preserve
Okay.
the distinct identity and social boundaries of the emerging Muslim
Yeah.
community.
So it was about protecting
Yes.
their own
Exactly.
identity. Okay.
And their own social fabric.
So it was a matter of survival.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay, yeah.
Especially during a time when the
Right.
community was still very vulnerable.
So just like those other principles that we talked about,
Mhm.
this one also was a response
It was.
to the specific
Mhm.
circumstances and challenges that they were facing.
Right.
Okay, now Hadith 739
Yes.
sheds light on another really fascinating aspect of inheritance,
Okay.
and it's this concept of
Yeah.
mawahat.
Mawamat, yes.
Now, I've heard that term before,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't quite recall what it refers to.
So mawakat is also known as brotherhood.
Okay.
And this was a remarkable social contract
Okay.
that the Prophet Muhammad established
Mhm.
upon the arrival of the Muhawirun in Medina.
Okay, so the Muhajirun were the early Muslims
Yes.
who had to
Mhm.
flee Mecca
That's right.
because of persecution,
Yeah.
and they went to Medina.
To Medina?
And that's when they established the
Yeah.
first Muslim community.
Correct.
Wow.
And the Ansar, the
Uh-huh.
people of Medina,
Mhm.
they welcomed the Muhajirun
Yeah.
with open arms.
That's beautiful.
So it's a beautiful yeah.
Of Islamic Brotherhood.
Okay, but how does this relate to inheritance?
So initially, the
Mhm.
Ansar, because of this profound bond of brotherhood, were considered the heirs
Wow.
of the Muhajirun.
So even though they weren't related by blood?
Exactly. Even if they weren't related.
Wow. So this bond of brotherhood superseded
It was a
universal
arrangement
That's amazing.
reflecting those extraordinary circumstances.
Okay, so was this a permanent thing?
So as the Muslim community in
Mm.
Medina grew
Mm-hmm.
and it stabilized,
Okay.
the rules of inheritance were clarified
Mm-hmm.
and refined
Oh,
through divine revelation.
Okay, so what happened?
So the revelation of verse 4.33
Mhm.
in the Quran,
Okay.
which states,
Yeah.
and to everyone we have appointed heirs,
Mm-hmm.
this verse superseded that earlier arrangement.
Okay, so it went back to
All right. So
a kinship-based.
yes, establishing the principle that inheritance should primarily
Follow blood ties.
So the Mawakat arrangement
Mm-hmm.
was like a temporary
Yes.
response to
Relatively
that specific situation.
unique challenges at that time.
It's amazing to see how flexible
Yeah.
these laws were
Mm-hmm.
and how they adapted to
Yeah.
different circumstances.
Right, highlighting that dynamic nature
Yeah.
of Islamic law.
Okay, so now as we're wrapping up,
Mm-hmm.
I want to circle back
Okay.
to that story
Yes.
of Prophet Solomon
Right.
and the two mothers,
Mm-hmm.
because even though it wasn't directly about
Right.
inheritance,
Mm-hmm.
I think it provides some really valuable lessons.
It does. Hadith 760,
Yeah.
which narrates that story,
Mm-hmm.
really emphasizes Solomon's wisdom.
Yeah.
How he didn't just rely on
Right.
evidence or,
Well, legal argument.
legal arguments.
Right.
He understood that the
Yeah.
truth sometimes lies hidden beneath the surface.
Right. In their hearts.
Yes.
And his proposal
Mm-hmm.
to cut the child in half.
Yes.
It was brilliant.
It was
Right.
it was a test.
Yeah.
It was a way to reveal.
Right. To see who the real mother was.
Yes.
And that's a good reminder
Mm-hmm.
that when we're dealing with
Right.
inheritance disputes,
Mm-hmm.
especially ones involving,
Right.
paternity or conflicting claims,
Yes.
we need to be sensitive,
Absolutely.
try to understand what's going on in people's hearts.
Right.
And
Not
it's-
just apply the rules.
Right, widely.
Okay.
Okay, so as we're concluding our deep dive
Mm-hmm.
into the
Yes.
laws of inheritance from Sahih Bukhari, Book 80,
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the main takeaway.
It is.
These laws
Mhm.
are not just about
Yeah.
dividing up assets.
Mhm.
They're about upholding justice,
Yeah.
compassion,
Yes.
social responsibility.
Absolutely.
It's amazing to see how
Mhm.
back then
Mhm.
they created a system that was designed to
Mhm.
take care of everyone and
Right.
to meet everyone's needs.
A system where the vulnerables were protected
Right.
and families were supported.
This has been an incredible journey. Thank you so much
It's
for
been my pleasure.
walking us through these fascinating hadiths
Mm-hmm.
and for illuminating all the deeper meanings.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I have a whole new understanding
That's great to hear.
of inheritance
Wonderful.
and its role in shaping a just and compassionate society.
And remember, these hadiths
Yeah.
are just a starting point.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
so much more to explore.
Absolutely. We encourage you to continue learning,
Yes.
continue studying,
Mm-hmm.
and think about how these principles might,
Yeah.
apply to our own lives and inform our own understanding
Mhm.
of these important issues.
Of fairness
Yeah.
and social responsibility.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
This has been an enlightening discussion.
It has.
And until next time, may peace be upon you.
It's amazing how, even though these laws were revealed centuries ago,
Yeah.
they still speak to us.
Mm-hmm.
They still address some fundamental
Yeah.
human concerns.
Right. Like how to create a fair and just
Mhm.
society.
Exactly. A society where everyone feels cared for,
Mm-hmm.
where everyone's needs are taken into consideration.
Okay, so let's continue our exploration of
Okay.
Book 80.
Sounds good.
Now, you mentioned earlier this concept of asaba.
Yes. The closest male relative
Right.
who inherits the remaining wealth
Okay.
after those fixed shares are distributed.
And I'm curious how this asaba was actually determined in practice.
So Hadith 730
Okay.
offers a really interesting perspective.
Yeah.
It mentions that Abu Bakr
Right.
considered a grandfather
Okay.
to be like a father
Oh.
in matters of inheritance.
So if there's no father, the grandfather would step in.
Exactly.
Okay.
Highlighting the importance of lineage
Right.
and proximity
Okay.
in determining who that asaba would be.
It's like this chain of responsibility, ensuring that someone within the family is there to take care of things.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, this concept of lineage
Yes.
is further explored in Hadith 731,
Okay.
which gives us this fascinating kind of historical overview of how these inheritance laws actually evolved in early Islam.
It talks about how in the very early days, inheritance was mainly given to one's offspring.
Okay, so the children.
And legacies were given to parents. But then this system was modified through divine revelation.
So they changed it.
Yes.
Wow.
Allah, through revelation, introduced this new system
Okay.
where males received a share equivalent
Okay.
to 2 females.
So this is that principle
Yes.
of males inheriting twice the share.
Exact.
Okay, so this is where that comes from.
And this hadith provides that historical context for its introduction.
So it wasn't just like an arbitrary...
No, it was revealed to address the specific circumstances of that time.
And that's why it's so important to understand the context.
Yes, context is crucial
Yeah.
before making judgments about these laws.
Okay, now.
And this hadith goes on to outline other changes that were made to ensure fairness.
Okay.
So, for instance, it specifies that each parent should receive 1/6 of the inheritance.
Okay.
A wife receives 1/8 if the deceased has children, but 1/4 if he doesn't.
So it's like they really try to cover
it's very detailed.
all the different possibilities.
It's like a legal puzzle where every piece has its place.
Okay, now what about situations where the deceased had debts?
That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
Islamic inheritance law doesn't just focus on, distributing assets.
Right.
It also deals with the financial obligations of the deceased.
Okay.
And in fact, settling debts is a top priority.
Okay.
It takes precedence.
Even before inheritance.
Over the distribution of inheritance.
Okay, so first you pay off the debts.
Exactly. Several hadiths emphasize this principle. For example, Hadith 723 states that if someone dies in debt and doesn't have enough to cover those debts, the Muslim community is responsible for settling them.
Yeah, it's powerful.
This highlights that collective responsibility.
It's beautiful.
It is a beautiful reflection.
Okay, now we've talked about debts, but what about
Yes.
dependents? Like if someone dies
Yes.
and they have young children or elderly parents who relied on them.
It's another crucial element of this system.
Okay.
It's designed to ensure that even after death, those dependents are taken care of.
It's like a safety net.
It is a safety net woven into the system.
Okay.
Hadith 737 actually states that if someone dies, leaving behind dependents like young children or those in need, the prophet considered himself their guardian.
So he's like...
As his setting an example.
Yeah, like I'm responsible.
Yes.
That's amazing.
It's not just a legal obligation.
Right.
It's a moral and spiritual imperative.
Okay, so we're seeing how these laws really emphasize this idea of taking care of one another.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's something that I think really inspiring.
It is.
About these teachings.
It's a beautiful reflection.
Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
In terms of the laws of inheritance.
Yes.
And it's clear that these laws were designed to create a just and compassionate society.
Absolutely.
A society that really took care of all of its members.
Yes.
And, even though these laws were revealed in a specific time and context, the principles behind them are still relevant today.
They are timeless, aren't they?
They are.
Yeah.
And they offer us guidance and wisdom
Yes.
as we try to navigate these complex issues
Absolutely.
in our own lives.
And it's a reminder that inheritance is not just about dividing up possessions.
It's about more than that.
It's about upholding justice and compassion.
And building a society where everyone feels valued and supported.
Yes, beautifully said.
So thank you again for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
On this journey through the laws of inheritance.
Yes.
And for sharing your insights.
My pleasure.
We hope that this deep dive has been beneficial for our listeners.
Yes.
And that it's inspired them to continue exploring these fascinating topics.
Yes.
And until next time, may peace be upon you, of